I'd like to thank all members for their contribution to the debate today, and anyone who is involved in the industry who is watching this and looking for change here, and for all those members who talked about the financial, emotional and human pressures that Bovine TB places on our farming families across Wales. Laura Ann Jones opened the debate, saying we finally have a consensus in this chamber that something needs to be changed. You raised about the stress and anxiety that farmers face, but also the economic damage to the industry. But you also talked about the human cost and the cost it has in lives in the industry as well. And you also highlighted the effective wildlife and that we need a step change here and a move where, as the Minister highlighted as well, that the programme board has said we do need to have a step change here in Wales. And you did also reinforce about the previous government's failing to address the disease with numerous projects that really didn't get us anywhere, just got us in the mess that we're in now. Vicky Howells, it was good that you recognised the pressures that the disease places on farmers. And you also say that cattle-to-cattle transmission is high. I don't dispute that, but they've got to get infected from somewhere in the first place, and that tends to be from the wildlife population. You also mentioned about instances going down, but I'd just like to quietly remind you that the herd of cattle across Wales has dropped by 40%. So there's naturally going to be a drop in the numbers of herds getting infected when less and less people across this country are keeping cattle for a number of the reasons which members highlighted today. You also said that the tag needed more science, and we needed more science again, but we've heard that from previous Labour governments from a number of years. They know what the science is, but then when they don't like the science advice they're given, they said we need more and need more again. You can't keep going asking for more science till you get the answer you want. If the answer is clear from a number of studies, then something needs to be done about it. Now, Andrew Griffiths raised about the 500 new outbreaks and 10,000 cattle lost every year, but that's already at breaking point. The critical numbers of cattle across the country are so low now. That's putting huge pressure on the wider system. Our abattoirs, other members talked about the economic elements about that, and especially the jobs that we're seeing lost in some of our abattoirs across the country. It all feeds into the reason why people are not keeping more cattle, because of the human impact of this disease. Having continuous testing of cattle all the time puts huge stress on our farmers, but also puts huge stress on the animals, which makes them very dangerous actually when you're handling them all the time. And that is why we're seeing a rise of people getting injured by cattle with continuous TB testing. Elwyn Vaughan, thank you for your contribution. I know you've talked on this for a number of times when we both sat in the Chamber in Powys County Council together, and actually highlighting the mental impacts that this does place on family, and also the work that our young farmers clubs are doing across the country, an organisation that really made me come here a lot of the time, but actually the work that they're doing to actually support people with their mental health across the country. And I would just say to anybody watching this debate, if you are struggling with your mental health and well-being in the industry, there are a number of charities in the rural sphere who will step in and help you, because no one should have to suffer alone. Helen Jenner, you talked about, farmers feeling that we need to move on. We've had these discussions, and I can tell you I've probably talked in this chamber a number of times about TB, probably the most I've ever talked about in here, and we do need to have some movement. It's pleasing to hear the Plaid Cymru will be supporting this motion today, but what I'm led to believe, and that is a positive step, that we've actually got a majority now that wants to get on and do something about this. Our farming families have waited far too long, and the time for action is now. Paul Davis, I'd like to thank you for all your work that you've done under this for 20 years, and also recognising the impact this had on your family. I know you've been a champion of this. I know your other colleague who's here, Sam Kurtz, raised a project in Pembrokeshire around this and the work that they've done, but also the work that the previous Economy, Trade and Rural Affairs Committee did on this. There was another piece of evidence that I'd like to highlight to Vicky Howells. That was a cross-party report that come back that says we do need to take action in the wildlife. But we want need to be clear, this isn't, as people talked about, a blanket cull of wildlife. This is a science-led approach, because anybody who knows anything about this subject will tell you, if you have non-infected badgers, the best thing you do with them is leave them well alone. Some people who've had badgers on their farms for a number of years have never had instances of TB. This is a targeted approach where you can go in and remove infected wildlife. I know other members talked about a vaccine, but the problem we have with a vaccine, it cannot, when you have the testing done, they cannot actually disseminate which animals have been vaccinated or which animals have not. So the vaccine is not quite there yet, but thanks, Paul, for all that you've done on this. Stephen Senior, I agree with everything you said about farmers shaping our environment and needs to be supported, but also the bureaucratic elements that come with TB, the paperwork that comes with it, with case vets and all the people who come around you all the time. It's an absolute nuisance, puts a lot of stress on our farmers. Thank you, Anna Nicol, for your powerful contribution highlighting the Fermio documentary. I remember in the previous Senedd when that was highlighted, I don't think anybody across this chamber could not be moved by actually what was said in there, and actually the cow that was culled on there that had a calf inside her as well. You know, a lot of people were moved by that, and I actually thought the previous government would move on that. They moved a little bit on policy on it, but it didn't have a huge step change, which we all hoped it would. Paul Rock, I respect your right to an opinion about infection rates, but I'd like to say what I said earlier, that actually the herd rate has gone down by 40% here in Wales, so there's going to be less infections. And we do need action now, and I think we need to have a clear steer in this chamber for the Minister that if the technical advisory group comes out and says we need to have a targeted intervention in wildlife, that the Minister's got a clear steer that the majority of the chamber want to move that way and not having more posturing and debates to stall the issue. We need to move on. And finally, to the Cabinet Secretary, I think I'm doing right for time, and finally to the Cabinet Minister, I should say, not Cabinet Secretary, thank you for your response. It's actually very refreshing to hear a minister sat in that chair actually saying that we need to get on and sort this issue and not defending a failed policy for the last 20-odd years. Because I do agree with you on biosecurity. This isn't just a one-size-fits-all, and no outbreak is the same. So we need to make sure we're addressing in the biosecurity. Working with vets, I think that's very important to understand your individual circumstances and put that right. And hopefully the Welsh Government, when looking at grants, they did a lot of work actually about raising feeders so people aren't feeding on the floor, making sure that stores are covered to make sure we can get this disease under control. But I would just like to say to the Minister, one thing that probably hasn't been mentioned is about case vets. Something that you probably has raised them with me is making sure there is that consistency with case vets when they are going out on farms. There's nothing more frustrating than people if they have different vets all the time, and that does cause a lot of anxiety in the industry. But I'd like to thank all members, and I'm testing the Llywydd's patience because it's gone red and people want to go home. But no, I will say thank you to all members who contributed today. There is a differing opinion, but I think there is a majority in this chamber now that wants us to move on this issue. So I'd like to thank all members today. Let's get the step change they need. Let's support those farmers, and let's get this disease finally, once and for all, under control. I advise all members support the motion.